Today we are very fortunate to have with us here at the Edwards College of Fine Arts and Humanities, right? Notice how I switched the order there. It's the Edwards College of Fine Arts and the rest of you guys. We are lucky to have with us today the artist Jonathan Bryant, who's come and visited with us for the last 2 weeks doing an installation in the Rebbecca Randall Bryant Art Gallery here on campus. I hope all of you have had a chance to stop over and see the work as it's progressed over that course of time. Mr. Bryant is a native of Charleston. He received his BA in Studio Arts and a minor in Art History from the College of Charleston, and then he completed his studies as an MFA in Spatial Arts at San Jose State University. We're very fortunate to have Mr. Bryant with us for many reasons, but for two very important reasons. He's a South Carolina Arts Commission Visual Fellow for 2011. He's also a recipient of a prestigious Pollock and Krasner Foundation Individual Artist Grant this year. He travels around the country doing installations and site-specific sculpture for both institutional galleries and commercial galleries, so you may see him again at other venues. He's been an artist in residence recently at the Visual Arts Center of Richmond, the McCall Center of Visual Arts in North Carolina, and the East-West Project in Berlin. He has also been a recent visiting artist at Kendall College of Art and Design, Winthrop University, Georgia College State University, the University of Memphis, the University of Oklahoma, Henderson State University, and many others. But I will stop there before I embarrass them. He's also a recipient of the Joanne Mitchell Foundation Full Fellowship Award as a sculpture residency at the Vermont Studio Center. So if you'd all join me in welcoming Mr. Bryant here to Coastal Carolina University.
Hello. First, let me turn on the clicker. I want to thank you guys especially Jim, for inviting me. You know, when he contacted me in the fall, I guess, when you arrived. I think like the day after he got his coastal email address, he emailed me. And so I'm always appreciate being invited somewhere rather than having to beg and submit. So it's been a real joy to be hosted here, and I kind of live for being given, an empty room. A lot of y'all may dream of other things. I dream of empty rooms. Anyways, let me get started and explain myself. You're looking at the welcome sign in the town of Bryant, Alabama. I was driving out to the West Coast, as I've had to do a lot, and just driving west, and there's a road, it's like 78 off of, you take 20 through Birmingham and then cut over. And I was driving down the road, and there was a sign that said, Bryant, 3 miles away. I was like, oh my God, I'm home. But I tell that story to explain a lot of the way I've made my work, a lot of the way I've lived my life is by having a very limited amount of plans. I try and sort of set a framework and then sort of go from there. And so for me, I sort of like the town of Bryant, Alabama. I found it by accident, and I frequently revisit and absolutely pose with these signs and have fun in this tiny, rundown town. Anyways, in 2006, I was an artist in residence at the Redux Contemporary Art Center down in Charleston, South Carolina. And for that project, what I did was, it existed in writing, kind of where this has come from, is I wrote out this idea that I wanted to be the Goldsworthy of the coffee shop. And all that meant for me was that I really liked British artists like Andy Goldsworthy, like Richard Long, this whole sort of crop of British artists that what they looked at was the natural environment. They gathered their materials and they brought them back in the gallery. But what was important to me is they didn't alter their materials in any way other than through their own hands, through their own labor. But I tend to get things wrong, so I was like, oh, well, my natural environment's a coffee shop, so I'll just gather everything there. And so what you see here is the first thing I did for that residency is I made a poster, mostly to cover my ass because I didn't know what I would be able to do. But I'm pretty crafty. So what I did is I liberated all the materials I could find in local coffee shops. These are the sticks woven together. These are 1,000 white lids and 1,000 black lids arranged in a 10-foot diameter circle. And there's no magic to that. It's just that when I went around to shops and said, hey, do you think I could have, a box of lids for an art project? It's for kids. They happen to have a box. Here's 1,000 white and here's 1,000 black lids. And hence the 10-foot circle. And then these are the sweetener packets just arranged on the floor, stacking them onto each other. And then for the following year after the show, I think the gallery just sort of used them at openings. And sort of this final piece, these are the cups of coffee consumed by the artist while in residence are placed in the corner. And that's kind of, as much as I'll talk about British artists, this is also kind of an American thing, a real love of the corners of galleries. And for a little while I was kind of interested in hugging the corner of the space. It took me a year or so of doing this to get comfortable, to come away from the walls and kind of really trust myself with space. But the year after that, I was in residence up in Sumter, South Carolina. Has anybody heard of Sumter? A big hand for Sumter? Cool. Did y'all see this in 2007 up in Patriot Hall? No? Oh, well. Well, Sumter had this really great residency program where they put you in, you'd stay with guest houses and you'd live there. And part of the thing I wanted to solve with this was, now that I knew I could work with these materials, I sent a bunch of sticks ahead of time, and I didn't really know that it would work, but that's the beauty of a residency, is you're given some time to just make a piece. And so I sat on top of a genie lift and put this together over the course of 2 weeks. Well, around that time, I submitted some of my work to a gallery in Brooklyn, and this was the Dom Stoltrigger Gallery in Brooklyn, New York. And what she was at that time, my portfolio was kind of split between studio objects and things that you could just put in a box and send somewhere, and literally the 3 of these that I'd done. And she said, "Oh, I really like that thing you did at that residency. Could we get one of those for our gallery?" And without thinking it through, without thinking about it, this is that sort of the way I live my life. I was like, well, sure, if I could just stay there for a week, I'm sure I could do something similar. And without even thinking it through, I had agreed to build the most difficult piece at that time that I'd ever made in my life in a week in a storefront gallery in Brooklyn. And so what that meant was I lived in that gallery for a week, sleeping on the floor, and just working all the time and really telling myself, this show opens in a week, you got to pull this off. And I showed this shot to sort of show you when you went from the front gallery, you rounded this corner and there's that little recessed window, but I wanted to share with you that was the gallery cat. Bruiser is no longer with us, but Bruiser was a former street cat, and so while I was living in the gallery, Bruiser was really good at digging into my food and eating it. Like, Bruiser didn't care that it was people food. I explained to her, that I got a show opening in a week. But basically, this kind of laid the groundwork for the problem I needed to solve, which was, how do I explain that what I really want to do is come in somewhere like a residency and build work, but it will also be for an exhibition. Traditionally, residencies are these closed loops where you go somewhere, you make a piece, and you leave. There's no exhibition, there's nothing engagement with the public. So this is an example where I was invited to be in an art fair that year, and they're like, "Oh, you could just send down a section of the piece." I was like, well, that's not really what I want to do anymore. So I built this portable gallery, and you can see the little lighting. Oh, I bet this has a laser. Well, whatever. You can see gallery lighting put into the crate. And so this was to sort of explain that, well, what I want to do now is actually build stuff in response to a space. So here we go. So this is the problem when you stick yourself out there. In 2009, I had a really big commission for the city of Charleston, South Carolina. And at the time, this was kind of like, oh, I thought it'd be cool. I'll do that big piece. Well, what you're looking at is what was initially a joke amongst friends. I had booked mostly between friends that were similar to Jim that were working at universities, and they invited me in. So in August, you see, I was gonna be at the University of Oklahoma, and I was gonna be in Memphis, and I was gonna go back for a follow-up show to the show I'd done the year before in Brooklyn. So I jokingly said, "Oh, it's my Half Sticks Will Travel U.S. Tour 2009, fall 09. But this is the problem. People took that very seriously, and I started getting emails. "Whoa, you're on tour? Well, you should add my school, and you should add my gallery." And before it was done, the Half Sticks Will Travel World Tour birthed before my very eyes, much to my chagrin, because, like I said, I didn't really plan for it. I planned to be an artist. That's in the plans for now, and I was going to work, but I was just kind of embracing this. Okay, yeah, y'all, give me 3 hots and a cot, give me a small honorarium, I can make these pieces. So let's go on tour. So May of 2009, this was the commission that kind of kicked it off. And this was for the City Gallery. And what I was really trying to do here is, I was still really hung up on building just a large object. I was still you'll see the piece still kind of wants to touch the wall in the corner. I wasn't really sure quite what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to build something big in the space. And that was really interesting, and it was very freeing. So that was kind of nice. It gave me this giant hanging object. But next, I got to the University of Oklahoma, and I kind of show these process shots to show that this is what I show up to. This is what I arrive to. And I always over-document. Now that years have gone by, I can sort of start to see patterns. But this is, when I arrived in Oklahoma, I had shipped a crate ahead with a couple sections of the other stick sculpture, and then mostly those cases of sticks, and then I just went to work. And the thing about OU is the gallery space there presented a really interesting thing. The Lightwell Gallery goes up, a really high vertical, and so what I was able to do is kind of reach back to what I'd done a couple months before, and rather than do one hanging object, I kind of pulled the object apart. And this has sort of been the fun thing about working this way. Since I have no fixed studio anymore, I get to revisit this work each place that I go, so I can just kind of pick up where I left off on the previous installation. And if you look in this shot, you'll see this sort of line running down the front of the piece where it's sort of like a crisscrossing plane. You'll see that show up momentarily. But again, at this time, when I was there, the whole tour thing was just kind of like an inside joke. Yes, Jonathan Bryant's on tour, we should bring him. But the printmaker at OU, Curtis Jones, that's really his name for those who are Leonard Skinner fans, was like, we should make some prints. If you're on tour, you need a t-shirt. So 30 seconds later, we came up with a logo and printed some glow-in-the-dark t-shirts, and then did this whole sort of like cycle of prints. And I didn't think much of it because in a couple weeks, I had to jet off to the University of Memphis. And I just sort of want to show this is how the University of Memphis piece began. And then when it's done, you can see, too, you see that intersecting plane. That was sort of the last thing I did in Oklahoma, and I was able to, the month later, pick up where I left off. And it's sort of, that's what a lot of y'all have come in the gallery and sort of asked me about, how do I do this? Where does it come from? At this point, the work, although it was based on a funny idea for interventions, now has just become an elaborate series of drawings. But rather than gessoing a canvas or preparing a sheet of paper, I've got to prepare contracts and negotiate dates and then get a gallery space. And that's sort of my blank paper. So I'll show you. The other thing that was cool about Memphis is the previous two pieces had been big, high spaces, a lot of ladder time. If you notice, this ceiling is a very comfortably low ceiling, so there was very limited ladder time in this space. And I did this kind of closed-in landscape piece. And this was actually the first show where I got to drive past Bryant, Alabama, just as point of reference to put this all in context. And this time, rather than create a really obvious space you could occupy, I was still feeling a little bit sheepish. You can get into that interior space, but you have to literally get down on your belly and kind of do like a little military crawl, which really challenges people because if you stand up, you will break it. But one of the best moments was the sculpture professor there, Greeley Maya, in the middle of his class critique in there, sort of discussing it. Everyone's like, "Where's Greeley?" He's like, "I'm in here." He had this nice 60-year-old man. He'd crawled inside, and he was just hanging out inside the sculpture. So here we go, and I sort of embraced this whole touring aesthetic, and a lot of that's based in my kind of vision of myself and also of working artists as a bit like, independent musicians. We book small gigs, we do the work, we move on, we engage directly with an audience. So this was the first of many merch booths. And keep in mind, I had just made this stuff the week before, and the poster, I just printed it. I was just sort of like, okay, yeah, I'm on tour, ha, ha, ha. Well, here comes the problem.
And welcome back, everybody. You're watching News Channel 3 Live at 9. We introduce you to Jonathan Bryant. At the top of the show, an artist who works with a rather unusual medium, coffee shop stir sticks.
Now, Jonathan is from Charleston, one of the beautiful cities that we talked about at the beginning of the show. And he is on his Have Sticks Will Travel World Tour. It's a marathon series of art projects created in 8 galleries across 2 continents, including a stop here in Memphis. You're doing a 2-week, what do you call it?
Residency.
Residency, okay.
You're stirring it up now here in Memphis, so to speak.
We'll never look at stir sticks the same way again, Jonathan.
All right, Jonathan, what is the fascination with these stir sticks?
Well, I was, a couple years ago, I was an artist who used materials from the natural environment, in quotes, and I realized it's really expensive and difficult to take trips into the woods, so I looked at the coffee shop as my natural environment. I dwell in a city, so I just sort of adapted my way of working to all the natural materials available within the coffee shop. So I think of the coffee shop as my natural environment.
I love it.
Very different,
and that's
very
so
unique.
true for so many
I
of us.
know.
So what did you do other art like with napkins, or did you just focus on the stir sticks as the natural?
No, I've used napkins and prints. I've used lids, the straws, the sleeves, the sugar packets. The sticks are just the most portable, where someone can bring me in. I bring several cases of sticks, and I work in residence and create a piece 4 places. So that's how I'm traveling around doing the sticks.
Next stop on the tour was Berlin, and how I ended up in Berlin is a funny story. That show in Brooklyn, first off, if y'all are interested in becoming working artists, it's not that it's gonna like everything changes, but it's always like you should have sort of weird small goals. And like I had a goal that I wanted to have some sort of show in New York after I got out of graduate school. You know, I gave myself a couple years, and I got hooked up with that project space within 2 years of getting out, or like a year out of graduate school. But in the interim, she had moved to Berlin because, as she says it, the rent is cheaper in Berlin than it is in Brooklyn. And so over the course of, this is one of those things where she's like, oh, Jonathan, I see you're on tour. Let's just bring you to Berlin. You can stay in our pad. Now I've upgraded this time, by the way, not sleeping on the floor. I got to sleep on an air mattress in Berlin. So that's luxury, by the way. But the important thing about the Berlin piece is at this point I really have dialed in this working with limited means. All I've got is me, the space, some time, and some sticks, and I can still create the work I want to. So this is the Berlin piece, and this is a great space because it's this. What I did this time is, having just finished with Memphis, I wanted to make as many bent-in spaces as possible. So the whole form kind of folded in on itself, and it was I was working in a storefront window, so that was always really exciting. And then, of course, the merch booth. And if you look closely, you'll see the prices in euros. You see, 20 euros. Anyways, do the conversion. And I like to show this too. Lest you think that it's safe to fly internationally, it's not. Those are 2 duffel bags full of sticks. I checked 100 pounds of timber, and no one batted an eye. They didn't care, they didn't question. So it's not safe to fly. Just keep that in mind. So, but again, you know, that's an entire installation for $50 in baggage fees, and we created the entire piece, and then we destroyed it and gave the material away there. And this whole time, I've sort of been embracing that while also fighting the whole, like, well, I guess I am just kind of this itinerant, you know, artist. So here we go. And then the University of South Carolina, I did the show, I called it Sticks, Straws, Sleeves, and Lids, because both I kind of like a very literal sensibility, so those are literally the ingredients for that show, but I also, that's kind of those British artists, they're very direct, it's very non-narrative, it's very literal, and that appeals to me. So sticks, straws, sleeves, and lids, those would be all the materials for the show. So there's the sticks, and here's a little, this time I got to make a really great interior-exterior space. There's the sleeves, and this is one of the first times that I tried to bring the sleeves into the gallery. I had been using them in the studio and doing funny things with them, and in this version it's just one loop of sleeves and, you know, holding themselves together from floor to ceiling. And you'll see, well, you see now the latest evolution of that. But that's the thing, is like I sort of use each show to tease out and try other things. So these are the lids again, but this time it's a little blown out on the projector, but it's actually black, brown, and white lids. And at this point, I'd gotten really savvy at approaching vendors, and so I contacted the solo lid sales rep, and I was like, oh, listen, I'm an artist, I'm on my world tour, wouldn't you love to have your solo lids? You know, this all is done through email. Don't ever call on a phone and say you're an artist, they'll hang up. You want to send a professional email. And basically he's like, oh yeah, he's like, sure, I'll send you a couple sample cases. So I got black, brown, and white, and you'll see me, these reoccur a bunch, I get to reuse them a lot. But again, just being really savvy with getting what you need to make work. And then I like to show this. These are the straws actually running through the wall of the gallery. But on the left, to kind of show, a lot of people ask how I plan and how I think about the work. That's how I like to plan. I still like to make a drawing. You see the tracing paper there, trying different patterns. But it's still very much based in my interest in just making a drawing. You know, my drawings have become a little more elaborate, like I say, in logistics, but in thought and feeling, I'm really still working very much from the same direct place. This is a good example. This was a group show back in Brooklyn at a different space at a Nurture Art, which is this great nonprofit space. And the curators, same thing. Actually, at the time these guys emailed me, I was sleeping on that air mattress in Berlin, and they were like, hey, you know, we've got a cot if you want to come make this piece. And so that's sort of what it's like. Every other gig, I'm kind of, robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I had always had an end game in mind for the tour, and we'll get to that. But this is a good example where on the left is the picture they sent me, and I just would print it out, and I kind of drew that as like what might work in the space. I didn't bring that drawing with me or anything. That stayed pinned up on the wall at home, but I ended up basically making what I had pictured would fit the space and would work for the skylight and what I was given. And it was a great group show, and I had a lot of fun. I'm trying to think. I can name drop. Did anybody watch that TV show, Work of Art, the reality show at all? No? On Bravo? Yeah, okay. So remember in the first season, the older woman Judith, she was in this show too. So, but she couldn't tell anybody that she had taped the show. But the Jerry Saltz guy and all the posse people from that came to this opening. Everyone's like, what the hell are they doing in Brooklyn? And Judith's like, they're with me. And then a month later, she explained, I was kind of on this TV show with her. So anyways, it's a small world. And yes, I got to spend a week living working in that skylight in Brooklyn, and it was lovely. So next stop was Arkadelphia, Arkansas. You may be asking yourself, why Arkadelphia? Where's Arkadelphia? No one really knows. It's like an hour outside of Little Rock. But there's two universities there. One is Ouachita Baptist University, and another is Henderson State University. And this is this funny thing about how you never know who you're going to meet, who's thinking of you fondly, and who realizes you're on tour and suddenly has a budget to book you at their university. Someone that was on a search committee for a job I didn't get had gone on to become chair of a department at a university there, and is like, I'm bringing you. And the university across the street is like, hey, we saw that guy's on tour, and we saw he makes prints. Let's get him to do a printmaking intensive, and we'll share him across two universities. So over at Ouachita, I built the sculpture in their gallery space. And what was great about their gallery space, a couple funny quirks. You could sort of see it peeking through. This is this 4-ton giant block museum bench. And I'd always wanted to do this and hadn't had the opportunity, but I liked the idea that you wouldn't be able to actually access the museum bench where you would normally sit to look at the work. So this entire piece is built to just encircle and encase and block access to the bench. There's a little nighttime view.
What do you get when you combine a lot of coffee stir sticks and a little creativity, if not a lot of creativity? A masterpiece, at least in the eyes of some.
Up next, we're going to take a look at a sculpture with an unorthodox medium.
You're watching KARK4 News at 10 with Bob Clausen, Melissa Seamus, and meteorologist Brett Cummins.
A new sculpture at Ouachita Baptist University, you could say, is causing quite a stir.
You might say it's brewing up a lot of interest in the community. Artist Jonathan Bryant's Arkadelphia project is now on display on campus. Take a look at that. It is made entirely out of those coffee stirring sticks, 50,000 of them. No tape, no staples.
I'm going to answer any more questions you have. But it really all began with watching other people and the way they use their coffee cups. So it was the sleeve first, and then when I sought out my own materials, I gravitated towards these.
Brilliant sculpture will be on display through the end of the month. The reception will be held Thursday at 5. Coffee, I'm sure, will be served. You might have a hard time finding a stir stick, though, for your coffee, and don't take one from the rather large display.
That looks so time-consuming. Good for him.
Like 60 hours, 10 hours a day.
That was one of 3 segments that aired. I mean, this is major news. Artist makes art, film at 11. And this is, I think of myself, and it's funny, when I started this project, I think of myself as coming from kind of a difficult place, which is I kind of start with nothing. And I very much am drawn to artists who start with nothing. And in the very beginning, I thought I was doing something really smart, like, de-reifying the object of the coffee shop. But in time, what I've learned is I kind of reveal more about an artist than I do about objects and stuff that travels in life. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't just thrown myself out there, completely starting from nothing. So here's an example, now getting to expand the printmaking, what had been experiments. So up top, you can see an example actually taking the physical material, inking them, and then creating a record, which creates this embossed print. And then underneath, these are the inside of coffee cup sleeves, and making a stable collagraph plate and printing those. The arms you see are David, the printmaker at Henderson State, and he was a deer, because this is a lithostone. I don't know if anyone's done lithography before, is familiar, but that's a big lithostone. I had to prep those for other artists. But David had taken a look at some of my drawings and some of my other work and was like, oh, I bet you'd love to make a lithograph while you're here. So I arrive, and there's a fully levigated, prepared stone. And so what I did is I kind of made this drawing just of whatever I could find around the print studio while we were working on other prints. And we just kind of left the stone out, and it was great. I just would sort of go back and doodle on the stone and then made the print. And part of the sort of very simple humor I have, most of those tools and materials are things you would use in a print studio in making prints, including, the coffee cup, there's a funnel, there's a spray bottle, there's a light, there's goggles floating in there. There's also the slight image of a razor blade, and this is a case of where I amuse myself sometimes. The image of the razor blade is actually made by using a razor blade to scrape the material back off the stone. So again, that sort of literal and direct way of working. But anyways, next stop on the tour, the 18 Rabbit Gallery in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And again, when I declared I was on tour, I thought it would be sort of this short-lived thing. The woman who runs this gallery I had met years earlier in Sumter when I did that Sumter piece, and she'd always stayed in touch, and she was just sort of waiting for the right moment. And she's like, oh, well, I'm running a gallery now, and you're on tour. Let's do this. So what you're seeing now are some of the prints, which, again, this has become this juggling act that I've kind of now maintained since 2009, where I kind of rob Peter to pay Paul and use kind of every other work I make feeds into the next show. So here we go. This is the 18 Rabbit Gallery. And it's just great. You can see this old warehouse space that had been flipped into a big gallery project space. And this time you see the straws. I actually used them to kind of run through the sticks to kind of add a little, dash of color, if you will. There's a good shot. Someone squatting down in the background. I'm not sure what they're doing, actually. And then the merch booth, of course. And it's not that I was selling a ton of these t-shirts. I would sell about as many as I would print, and then I'd use it to print more. I don't know, something really appealed to me about always having a travel crate or having some sort of merch booth. It was kind of the whole indie rock thing. I would only have it at the opening night. It would go away after I left. So. Next stop on the tour is Mexico. And again, why Mexico? Why San Jose del Cabo, Mexico? For years I had been sending a series of work I do using rust, where I make these rust prints and I make these sort of welded steel sculptures, more conventional objects, I guess. I'd just been shipping them to this gallery in Mexico, and she would take a batch, and once a year she'd send me some money, or I'd have to send her some nasty emails. Did you sell anything? Oh, yes. Here's your money. Same thing. All of a sudden, I got a phone call one day, and she's like, I saw you're on tour. I've never cared about installation work before, but why don't we bring you here on your tour? So the answer is yes, and I love this sort of the bilingual signage. For the free entrance, it says Entrada Libre, and that feels like some sort of, cry. So here's the space. She got an empty, one of the empty storefront spaces where her gallery was donated to use for the project. And again, there's the old duffel bags, although this time I was using the duffel bags for clothes. We were able to send the sticks with a load of material, so I just had to fly down with clothing. And then here comes what normally I would get the title of the pieces myself, and each show had been called Have Sticks Will Travel. I don't know if anyone speaks Spanish. I don't speak it very well, but if you notice, the title is Más allá de las palabras, which basically translates as beyond words. And how that came about is classic lost in translation. The phrase "have sticks will travel" doesn't literally translate to Spanish. So the gallerist and her designer were like, well, we can't really, it doesn't make sense. What do we say? Oh, I don't know. It's, we can't translate. It's beyond words. That's it. That's the title of the show. So the title of the show was quite literally the fact that we couldn't translate the phrase "have sticks will travel world tour." And actually in Germany, we had a lot of trouble. My German's horrible, is for shite. And we had trouble translating the phrase there, but I just used it anyway. So here's Mexico. And again, working a lot against time, but also my friend the ceiling tile. This is another trick I sort of picked up along the way, that if I want to anchor and secure and get a piece going, I can shove stuff in a ceiling tile. You see it at the top there. So a little back view of the space.
Por más de una semana, el artista Jonathan Bryant tejió alrededor de 60,000 revolvedores de café de madera para la creación de una extraordinaria escultura que se sostiene únicamente a base de tensión.
At this point I'm finished, but I was here for a week creating a new site-specific sculpture for the city of San Jose del Cabo. For me, it's just an opportunity to make more work, and I think the best way to understand it is where normally an artist may make an abstract drawing on a piece of paper, and it's very simple to buy a piece of paper and make a drawing and then just hang it on the wall.
to me, this is a way of making a series of really elaborate drawings, except the space is the sheet of paper, and you can think of the sticks by materials as the pen or the ink or the marks or the crosshatch or the drawings. So for me, it just means a chance to make a series of drawings in space, and that's kind of how I think about it.
Este ejemplo de arte instalación es evidencia de la creatividad e ingenio de un hombre.
Anyways, and again, another fun lost in translation moment was I was speaking with her and she was asking her questions in Spanish, and I would politely explain in Spanish, I don't speak Spanish. And she would ask again in Spanish, I don't really speak Spanish that well. So then finally someone off camera, what's edited out, is translating her questions, but in a very direct, barking way. Like, she's asking in a very nice, and then he's like, what she said was, where do you get your materials from? And it was, okay. So, and then I would answer, and then they dubbed it over. It was, these are things that art school doesn't prepare you for. So, one of the penultimate stop on the tour was the Bumbershoot Festival in Seattle, Washington. And it seemed very fitting, and the artistic director there thought it was hysterical, because there I'm going to come home to the capital of coffee. This is actually an art and music festival. This is rock and roll. And at this point, there's a little bit of budget to send crating. You see the stenciling on the outside that says "Have Sticks Will Travel World Tour." Spray painted stenciled crate. Well, the stencil came from the show in Florida. She had made it for the walls, but at this point, I've really, fully embraced it. Well, plus it's the next to last stop on the tour. And this is the Bumbershoot piece. And a lot of the consideration here was the 10,000 anticipated visitors a day that we would get. So I built the piece entirely thinking about traffic flow. And really, the sticks and the material were almost irrelevant. I just wanted to shape a space that would have people going in and out of it. So hence the giant entryway that is completely compliant with fire code. Like, that's literally measured to be big enough to make the fire marshal happy, and all the sort of space around it. And that was one of those things just about really embracing it. And actually, this is a good example. You can almost see in the background, you see how there's a darker and lighter areas in the back of the piece there? That's because for this one, I knew I was going to be doing a simplified form, and I just sent a ton of the panels ahead of time. But things that make me happy. This is the Bumbershoot t-shirt for 2009, or 10, that was 10, right? 2010. Bob Dylan, Mary J. Blige, Weezer, Hole, Drake, Rise Against, Necco Case, The Decemberists. Why don't you scroll all the way down, see on the bottom of the bill, Jonathan Brilliant. That's right, I shared a bill with Bob Dylan, so there you go. He may write songs, but I weave sticks. Anyways, life's little victories. So the last stop on the tour, and I had declared it to be the last stop because I knew I would have 3 months to be in one spot, was the McCall Center for Visual Arts. And in fact, when I got the McCall Center, when I got the call that I'd gotten it, I was ecstatic and very excited because it's a really great residency. They give you a studio, a stipend, an apartment to live in that has cable TV, and I don't own a television, so it was hard a lot of days to pull away from the cable television in the apartment and go into the studio. But they also, the same thing happened. They're like, oh, well, we see that you're now on tour. Why don't you do a show before your residency? Come in a week early. So I did, and I did the finale show. So on the left is the ultimate merch booth. It's now got all the postcards from all the shows from the 18 months prior. It's got the t-shirt, it's got the poster. This time I've used the stencil, and that was my sort of first attempt at staining coffee on the wall. And in this version, I was thinking wrong. I was taking actual brewed coffee and mixing it with powdered creamer to make a dry paste and smearing it on the wall. So that's why you see this sort of light staining. But anyways, since it was going to be the finale, I was going to bring forward a little of everything. So there's a stick piece. This time I did sort of the lid wall remix. So there's a white ring, a brown ring, and a little black ring on the outside. Lines with them. And then some of the prints. And this time, not knowing that would happen, but I had 18 months worth of strange news clips and tour videos and things I'd made, so it kind of put like a close the loop on the whole touring thing. Although that whole experience, just has changed my life and my work completely. But this is a case of where I really like to take advantage of what's in the space already. And one of the nicest compliments I ever hear and get and keeps me excited, not the stuff about the no glue or the technical stuff, because that's not what keeps me interested. When people say, "Oh, it looks like it looks like it was made for this space," without realizing how funny that is when they say that. Like, they come to an opening, they don't know any of the background, any of the context. They just think they're coming to see a show of work. And I feel really good because without explaining anything, without saying like, yes, I lived here for 10 days, they're like, this looks like it was made for this space. That makes me feel good. Like, that's success. Like, it communicated well. And the reason this is made for this space is because there's a giant steel structural beam, and I actually encircled that beam and built off of that, both to physically tie to the space, but also it seemed right. So, and here's and this time, the interior-exterior spaces are a little more obvious, giving people a pathway. So, after 18 months of, once a month sleeping on floors and beds and cots and weird guest houses, what does one do when given a fully funded studio for 3 months? You sit and look, and you stare, and you think, and you really do the things that you miss doing in a studio, processing and digesting and filling out applications and you make prints. And this is a good example of I had done this series of gestures, literally activities in the studio, and one of them was kind of pointing and looking, and so I made this screen print, and my original intention was I was going to do these sort of drawings off of it, but I came to really like me stuck on the blank sheet of paper, and this was actually really the first time I'd done like a self-portrait in ages, and it's become a really fun image, and it kind of encompasses the time I spent at the McCall Center. But the other thing I did for 3 months at the McCall Center is I watched clouds go by. And what I was doing was every day at 3 o'clock, I would set up my still camera, I would get out my Polaroid, and I'd get out my video camera, and I'd capture as much imagery as possible of the clouds going by. And the thing is, I had never had a studio with a window before. I always rent or renovate really dingy spaces. I'm in a storage space right now, so windowless environments are very much my bread and butter. But I really was like staring at the clouds, I was taking pictures, and I was like, this is just so hippie. And I don't know, somewhere in the course of it, I decided I wanted to project the sky so it could see itself. And it's a real simple gesture. What I wanted to do was I wanted to take the view that the building sees and share it back with the sky. And so what these are is, and you'll see at the very bottom of the image, you see the fluttering moving really fast. This is actually the clouds sped up about 2,000 times real time. I thought it would look really disturbing, but it's funny, like they still move like clouds. Like this is hours and days passing, but then projected large scale on the outside of the building. And this was sort of my final piece there, and this was kind of the farewell to the center, but and it was a way to transform the building. I'd wanted to play around with projections at a bigger scale. So of course I like to reveal the process. So here's a little behind the scenes. The two projectors on the stand are not at all like, they're not household projectors like this. They push a little bit brighter, but we used a simple piece of software. Like Photoshop, I actually cut out that shape of the doorways so none of the light was blasting through the front door and bothering the patrons. But it also gave that great little image, that kind of surrealist image of like the church door floating in the clouds. So that was the end of the McCall Center. Here we go. Now we're into 2011. And at this point, it's no longer about tours. This show in 2011 was one where I had done one of the tour shows, but they'd sent my information along, and it's this great space at Georgia College. It's this old antebellum building that's been converted into a gallery, and there's 2 rooms. So what I did in one room was built a stir-stick structure, and I got to do something I'd been wanting to do for a while, which is block off part of the access to the gallery, because the curator there, Carlos, was like, oh yeah, we've got 2 doors, block off one. Yes! So I was actually able to build in 1 door. In the second room, I wanted it to be physically empty, but to be full of sound. And this is something I've tinkered with for years, and I'll pull them out once in a while. These are what I call portable consumer fetish objects, and they're coffee cups that have been equipped with their own personal vibrators, and those vibrators are attached to motion detectors. So when you walk past the cups, they start to vibrate. And the idea is that rather than the fetish object turning you on, you're turning the object on. So then on top of that, I liked the sound so much, I would put contact mics on the surfaces where these vibrating cups are, run them through my amplifier, and leave that on a motion detector. So depending on when or how many people walk through the space, you get this sort of vibratory noise that's very celebratory. And this was part of the idea with that show for 2 rooms. was that one room would be physically full of all that labor and all that time, and the other room is physically full of noise and sound, generated mostly by you. If you stop moving, they stop moving. So, all right. And then, of course, the prints, more prints. These are the Milledgeville impressions. And again, that's part of my own sort of literal indexing system. I was in Milledgeville, Georgia when I made those impressions, so they're called the Milledgeville impressions. They probably don't show up on the thing. Oh yeah, they show up. Excellent. So another thing I'd been thinking a lot about is found text, and in particular fortune cookie fortunes. I've accumulated them for years, and I quite like how they're actually really ominous if you start thinking about it. You know, friends long absent are coming back to you. Those could be dead people coming back, and on the right, failure is the mother of success. So like that's pretty cruel, you know. Anyways, so then the other thing on the left, this is a great example of what I've enjoyed doing too. This is like a remix print. I had all the films, all the transparencies of prints made over the tour, and I was able to assemble them together. But then on the right, this is that thing about still kind of being from a stream of consciousness place. There had been a really big snowstorm, you guys remember last year in around December or January. I actually got to make a snowman, which is unusual in South Carolina. So that's a South Carolina snowman, and if you see, he's really dirty and muddy and nasty. And then the giveaway that it's actually mine is there's a green straw in his mouth. So again, the printmaker there, Bill, was a lot of fun. So here we go. Speaking of fortune cookie fortunes, this is Field of Good Fortune, and although it seems like a little different than what I've been doing, it's actually the same thing. When this call went out, they wanted work, temporary or permanent outdoor work, and I really liked the idea of playing with an existing pathway, and I love the idea of the fortune cookie fortunes because to me they look like little small Richard Serra sculptures. When they come out of the cookie, they have that bend, and they're just like a Richard Serra piece of steel. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be great just to make some big sculptures out of the fortune cookie fortunes? So hence, Field of Good Fortune came to life. And what I did is, although if you just start, and I have thousands of fortunes saved up, if you just start pulling them randomly, they are really cryptic and sad. But what I did is I made sure for the couple that I got approved for this, I picked all ones that were either related to the creative process or, in this case, the title of the show came from this one. This says, remember to share good fortune as well as bad with your friends. And rather than make fake fortunes, these are literally the fortunes put into a flatbed scanner to capture all the stains, all the Chinese food, all the age that came with them, and all the strange typesetting. If you notice, it says, keep true to the dreams of your youth. Like that sort of lineup and spacing, you can't fake that. So you have a keen sense of humor and love a good time. The other thing that happened, again unexpectedly, was people started playing these lottery numbers in the convenience store across the street from the park. So no one won on them, but if they did, I feel like they would owe me a cut. So, and of course, the merch booth. And that was opening night of the show, and actually you can see some of the other posters that have built up over time. So I will bring out the whole traveling salesman thing sometimes. Anyways, Jim mentioned Kendall College of Art and Design. This is one of those ones that I would file under Jonathan scheduled himself a little too tightly. They had originally wanted me, they were one of those ones that are like, oh my gosh, you're on tour, we should bring you to the Kendall College of Art and Design for Art Prize in 2010. And I'm like, oh crap, well I'm already at the McCall Center, but let's stay in touch, let's talk. And we dialed it back to like, well, let's just do a conventional visiting artist gig. So I actually went up there 2 weeks prior to Art Prize and worked there. And this was one of the first times where I really got to bring the sleeves into their own. And I had the space and the time and the supportive curators. They were like, yeah, sure, let's try this. And this is the first time I really allowed myself to pull them and tension them up in the air. And it was really nice because it gave me this kind of two-part piece. And again, kind of pulling from things I'd done before. There's the funnel shape I had kind of figured out at the McCall Center. If you look ever so slightly, you see a bench hiding in there. Not only is it just a bench, this is the Eames Museum bench. And this is furniture. Did I get that right? It's Eames, yeah. This is Grand Rapids, Furniture City. You guys can look that up. But it was just awesome to have the most iconic museum bench trapped inside my sculpture for the run of the show. And then, of course, while I was there, we made some prints. And so here's some more other fortunes. And I've been really careful. I have a giant jar of fortunes, but I've just try and pull them out and then index them as I get to make them. So I basically have a lifetime of prints to make, when I have access to screen printing. So the one at the top says, the project you have in mind will soon gain momentum, which is always a good feeling. An unexpected windfall will be yours. Because it was art prize, we were kind of, I was like, haha, this will be funny. And then this is the one, I love this. Only put off until tomorrow what you're willing to die having left undone. Well, that's not very encouraging. That's not very nice. You know, like, really? So, and then this is something I wanted to show about how being open to collaboration and also just chance, I guess. The printmaker there, we were talking, and he was like, yeah, you know, I've always wanted to do this, you know, the spray paint lithographs, and, you know, you can spray paint through a stencil. I was like, well, why don't I just use, you know, a section of woven sticks to spray down a pattern? So step 1, you see me actually spraying through a woven section of sticks. Step 2, that's actually the spray paint that made it onto a lithographic plate. Step 3, we're processing the plate. And step 4, we get this print. And again, it's this great thing about how, yes, now you guys know the process and all this went into it, but that print, when it hangs framed in a gallery kind of unremoved from all the context of like the touring guy uses woven sticks, it's still a really interesting print because it's kind of this weird, hazy, soft, looks like someone might have spray painted a piece of paper, but then when you notice the numbers, it says like, you know, 1 of 15. How did they addition, you know, did they just go spray a bunch of paper? But it was really fun, and Morgan's a really sharp printmaker, and actually he's really sharp. He's a printmaker, right? You know, usually they're inky and dirty, but he wears like sweater vests and like button downs and like cruises into his print studio like uber preppy, but is like a way dirty printer. But anyways, then the big daddy I've been working on and just finished up in December was the Visual Arts Center of Richmond. And what happened with this is, again, she approached me, the curator found me, and I'll tell you how small the world is. She had actually heard about my work in like 2008, before I ever went on tour, before I ever invented all that crap. She had seen the piece that Jim invited me. I forgot to show, or I didn't show it, but when Jim was at SC State, he and Scotty Peak, and back then I was still sort of doing other things, so I stayed with my in-laws. They would pick me up from my in-laws' house, and I'd commute to SC State with them and build a piece. Well, this curator, as far back as 2008, had sent someone to look at that piece, and she'd been quietly following me. And she popped up in 2011 and said, hey, I'm the director of exhibitions at the Visual Arts Center of Richmond. How would you like to do a show here? I was like, well, send me pictures of the space. And usually people send me pictures of like one room or, you know, maybe like the 2 rooms. This is a massive like 3-room art center gallery space. So we developed a show, but I still wanted to keep it in line with the whole residence. She's like, yeah, we'll have you in residence, you know, but we need to have an exhibition. We need to have it needs to be a plan. And I was like, all right, I got the plan. We'll make it evolve out of what I've done before. So I called the show Stick, Stack, Show. Get it? Tic-tac-toe, Stick, Stack, Show. I don't know where they come from, you know, blessed. So here we go. This is the first room you sort of enter through. And but what's so cool about this space, and you can see this in the shot, it's an architect-designed space, but the wall is so awesome, terminate before the ceiling itself. It's this raked ceiling. So I was able to have work flowing between rooms. So this first room, you walk right in, and there's the Big Daddy. But what I did was, there's the travel crate. And so both physically and visually, this entire show is growing out of the Have Sticks Will Travel crate. And I kind of, like, when I sold her on that idea, like, yeah, I think that'll work. She was like, oh, that's perfect. That makes the most sense. This'll do, you know, so. But I just thought it'd be kind of cool. I like my crates. I've always wanted to use them in some way. So this show literally was growing out of that work. Then expanding the lids. And this is actually, by the way, I'm still just reusing and remixing the same batch of black, brown, and white lids I got from the solo lid sales rep. And I just send him an email every once in a while. Hey, look what I did with him this time. He's like, oh, great. So for him, it was a good investment. You know, he expensed 3 cases for the arts. And it's hard to see in the projector because I know it blows the thing out. But I actually, on the left, it goes white, brown, black. In the middle, it goes brown, white, brown. And on the right, it goes black, brown, white. And what that does when you're standing in that space, it makes this eye flutter. It really makes your eyes sort of vibrate. So, for example, here in the gallery, the coffee stain on the wall, you'll notice that's the biggest. I've never done a coffee stain that big ever. But when I was doing these big lid circles, I was like, oh, when I get to not Grand Rapids, where am I? When I get to Conway. And I think that's about the time I emailed Jim that the title, I said, we're going to call it Weaving, Stacking, and Staining, because I'm going to do something like that. So here's just a shot of the secondary room, and you see on the shelf on the right there's our friends, the vibrating coffee cups, and so they get to make an appearance. And then moving through, this is the back room. still keeping like a conventional exhibition, so this back room was filled with prints, but if you look up, having gotten to elevate the sleeves at Kendall, I was always sort of thinking that, okay, I'll run the sleeves through the whole exhibition when I get to Richmond. There's just another view showing all the textures. There's the straws this time. And just another little shot showing the space. And yes, it was a big space. And this was actually the first space where I injured myself right good. That's a nice, not soft concrete floor. And I actually fell in that right corner of the piece. You see how there's a little bump on the piece? That's where I actually fell into it, punctured a big hole, and then had to fill it back to tense it together. And then those are some prints that were made in Grand Rapids, but we didn't have time to get them to the framer because I was coming, like a month in Grand Rapids a month before. But the brown area in the background was the coffee stain. And when I taped off and did that small coffee stain on the wall, that's when I was like, I know what I'm going to try, when I get to Conway. So, and then just real quick to show you guys, this is, sort of how it planned. And actually, this is an earlier plan for Richmond where you see things in different placements, but that's how loose I try and keep it. And Reese, welcome to 2012. All right. Thank you. I can, of course, answer questions if your asses don't hurt. Any questions?
That's what I was coming up here to facilitate, actually. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Mr. Bryant? Mr. Bryant, where are you headed after you depart from us?
Well, that's funny. You should ask Jim. They gave me this. This is their laser pointer, but I think it... That's funny. You should ask. Let's see. Bryant 2012. Does anyone know what this is riffing on? Yes. 2012. I couldn't resist. The most rock and roll thing. This is Rush 21 Flames, and that's my sticks on the little... I didn't want to get the naked guy running, but I think I may have to there at some point. That's a Rush joke. Canadian rock and roll. Anyways. So January, you'll see I'm at Coastal Carolina University. In February, I'm headed to Columbia College up in Columbia, South Carolina. And that's one of those things where you should always do the best work that you know how to do. I was working on that fortune piece, and one of the volunteers working with the group that was funding that also happened to be the gallery director at Columbia College, and she liked working with me and saw how responsible I was, and was like, why don't we do a show with you there? And so your show and that show, I've kind of planned as much as I do to be a suite of South Carolina shows. So next month I'll go there, and that show's going to be, the structure will be all sleeves, but what I'm doing is doing new large prints. And so I've kind of paired your show with that one. I'll eventually sort of make some sort of documentation of my mini South Carolina tour. In March, I'll be appearing at the Spring Educator Expo up in Greenville, North Carolina. To be announced, I'm going to be the Kohler Arts Industries residency, which is Kohler, the people who make your toilets. They have an artist residency for cast iron and porcelain. Let's see. June, come on, you guys. Finders Gallery, Raleigh, North Carolina. It'll be me, Crochet Oleg. Who loves Crochet Oleg? Come on, man. She crocheted the Wall Street Bull. And Matthew Kern. The working title for that show, the last one I saw was Making Ends Meet, which is a great title for a group show of artists. And then July, I am working on this right now. For North Charleston City Hall, I'm making a new permanent outdoor woven steel piece. And then, still to be announced, I might be going to the Currents Festival of Queens in Australia, but I've been including it on this as-yet unprinted poster because I'm hoping to guilt that curator that's coming through. This is a fun thing, and the downside about when people contact you. You do all these exciting offers, and make you fill out all this paperwork, and they're like, yeah, you know what, it's not going to work. And so I'm trying to make him convince him that it'll work. And then from July to September, I actually just found out while I was here, I'll be the summer arts resident at Art Space in Raleigh. And that was one of those weird things. The exhibition director there was one of the jurors for the South Carolina Visual Arts Fellowship thing. She saw my work, and she emailed me and was like, hey, you should really submit to our summer art residency. So whenever someone tells you to submit, that's a pretty, that's a list. Like when I've sat on juries before, and I've forwarded calls, people have been like, hey, you should really submit to this. I hear the jury is really lax. You should submit. That's a good sign. And then in September, I'm headed to California State University in Fresno. So, and then the fine print you can't read. It says dates and locations subject to change without notice. That's a good question, Jim. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, great.
What made you do the fortune
of Fortunes. Like I said, the coffee project has become this sort of thing in galleries. I began back in college individually framing my Fortune cookie fortunes. And it was actually one of the first sculptures I made. I had a display case for my Fortune cookie fortunes. And it always been in the back of my mind that those fortunes look like little Richard Serra. So it goes into the category of sketchbook work. It's things that I had always wanted to see realized but never had the right opportunity. So I think that a lot of what I do in the highly visible stuff is this, but there's a whole secondary body of work I do in the show. So it's something I was always wanting to try. Good question. Yes, hi.
Hey, where would you like to see this work evolve? Where would, let's say if you had whatever funds that you wanted.
I'll tell you what.
do with this?
It evolved. I was awarded a Pollock Craftsman Foundation grant last year, which is basically like a really big wig guy calls me on the phone and says, congratulations, next year your life is taken care of. So it's evolved. I mean, I don't want to see it go any further than now. I'm busier than I know what to do with. And I'm good for that. I'm planning out through September. That's how evolved I ever want to be.
I guess more in terms of let's say scale.
Again, scale is a relationship to the space I'm given. So with Visual Arts Center Richmond, that was physically the biggest space I could be given. It was a massive space, and I filled all 3 rooms. But I don't care it doesn't matter. I mean, if you're offering me to do that, sure. But whatever space I'm given, I'm going to interact with. The fortunes, there was a number of fortunes there were, and they were placed the way they were, because that was the green space I was given. I've been submitting that around for bigger sites. If I get a bigger set of fortunes, usually they'll be more. It'll just be a half dozen, they could be dozens. But I'll always adjust to say, if this were the gallery space, I would have asked for a month and a half, and I would have attempted to take on this room. So yeah, sure, I'll take a photo. Half space will travel really what's the deal. Give me a space, I'll shoot the best I can. That's a good question. In the back, yeah, hey.
Yeah, what was the projector software and the projector that you used to project the clouds on the building?
Oh man, that's a good technical question. Modulate, and we use triple head to go. But we slaved the triple head as a double head, and the projectors had 5,000 bulbs in it. My buddy Alex Rosen is my projectionist video guy. Whenever I do music performances, he also drags out equipment. He's an equipment guy. That's what he does, is video support. But Modulate was the software, and the triple head to go was the device that allowed the image to split. Is this making sense? But Modulate is spelled with 8 too. It's a British software. It's MODULA. It's actually for VJ, but we use it to manipulate video in time. Good technical question. Excellent. Yes, hi.
Sorry, losing my voice, but what about your friends and your family? Don't you ever miss? Are you by yourself a lot?
No, I'm married. I left home. I live in a place. It's just.
Oh, you do?
I'm just going like any working musician or working artist. I'm only gone 8 to 10 days a month. And even this show was close enough. My wife came down last weekend, and the resident at the call center we both lived there. We both lived there. We live in an apartment, So it's it's not complicated. It's like being a working musician. I think that this art has become so mysterious and removed from what an artist actually does. I always come back and say it's just like you picture a working musician. You travel to work. Sometimes you work at home. Sometimes you work for other people. Next week I'm going in to do some paperwork and finish up to work on a museum for another artist. Work at a museum project, not my own. But that's a good question. Any questions? I think that's probably good. We'll have a free food starting when?
Free food. We have an opening tonight for Jonathan Bryant. I encourage you all to come and make a great friend in the gallery, which is in room 129 of this great hall. And from 4:30 to 6